Welcome to The Naked Entrepreneur. I'm Dr. Sean Wise, and today I'm joined by internationally renowned designer Angela DeMontigny, who's native Canadian of Cree-Métis heritage. Angela's custom-made collections have been sold in specialty boutiques and galleries throughout North America and Europe since 1995. She is often designated as one of the leading authentic Aboriginal designers in North America, attracting the interest of accomplished singers, performers, and other high-profile personalities from across the world. Her wardrobe credits include CTV's Canada AM, Fashion Television, Success Stories, APTN, Flair Magazine, Chatelaine, Fashion Magazine, Outdoor Life. In the last 5 years, Angela has established Young Native Fashion Inc., the parent company behind her brand. She's opened a flagship boutique and gallery on the trendy James Street North in Hamilton, and she's launched her Respect capsule collection during the South African Fashion Week in October 2017. If that wasn't enough, she's also the co-founder of the Canadian Aboriginal Design Council and the newly launched Ontario Fashion Exchange. As of September 2018, we are delighted to announce that she's been appointed the new Distinguished Designer in Residence for FCAD at Ryerson University in Toronto. Angela, thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Have you always been a creator?
Yeah, I think so.
When did it first start? When do you think back to the first time that you really felt the creative vibe?
Well, I've always been artistic, I guess, even as a kid. So art was definitely my big thing in school. And even when I was like maybe 11 and 12, I was always sketching dresses and things like that in school, and I probably should have been paying attention in math or something.
Do you look at fashion as a type of art? So
Absolutely.
Clothing is your medium.
Yes.
Was it always, when you were a young gal, did you always paint designers, or did you sometimes do landscape? Did you try macrame? How did you get into clothing as your medium?
Yeah, I did. I painted in school for sure. So I was always able to draw. And that's actually, so illustration, fashion illustrating was really what I focused on, and that's what sort of drove me into this area. But also makeup artistry and hair and all of that, which are also very creative fashion industries.
Now, they are part art, but they're also part entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. Every solo artist, every solo fashion designer, they're their own business. Mm-hmm. It's not just the high-tech startups that are entrepreneurship. It's all sorts of entrepreneurship. When did entrepreneurship first start for you? When did you first decide, not only do I want to be in fashion design, but I want to work for myself?
I think it first started when I went to school sort of in my off time when I was a teenager, before I graduated high school, and learned makeup artistry. And then I got to know some local hairstylists. So I was like, I don't know, maybe 17, I guess, 18. And they were actually what we called platform artists. So they would travel to different, and this is Vancouver, BC. Mm-hmm. They would travel to different cities and set up in hotels, and they would like train the other stylists in that city about the new trends and things like that. So as a teenager, I mean, they treated me like a professional, and I would go up there and demonstrate makeup, just, like they were doing. So I was kind of working for myself at that point already.
Tell me about growing up and what your relationship was to both your heritage and towards what you wanted to do in the future.
So growing up with my heritage, mm-hmm. Actually didn't grow up with that so much.
Tell me about that.
So unfortunately, my late father, he passed away when I was 17, grew up in an all-boys Catholic residential school downtown Winnipeg, Manitoba. So his entire experience was not wanting to have his children, his daughters, grow up with the same kind of racism and lack of opportunity and things that he had faced. Nor did we even really, he never told us, things that he endured as a child. So these are things that I sort of dug into after he passed away and started reconnecting with the family and finding, because they had been all spread out throughout Winnipeg and Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and finding everybody, and they had all been disassociated with each other, and so I was able to bring everybody back together, which was really amazing.
How did that reconnection with your history influence your art, your design?
Everything. It just made sense. And so, I'm becoming more involved with traditional ceremonies and things like that, and just, sort of reestablishing and understanding who I was and where I came from. And some of my relations were fluent Cree speakers and Soto and Michif, and just, it was home. So it was just understanding who I was, and it was kind of like one of those moments where I realized this is who I am, this is what I connect with.
Did you always want to overlap those two things once you reconnected?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that your fashion would go down that route? Was that a mindful choice, or did it just influence you on a subconscious level?
I think it was an unconscious yet mindful choice. I chose to go that route, but it was always something that I was fascinated by. So even, my first business I started when I was 24, and I was doing hand-painted clothing, and then I sort of worked into doing sort of, my own sort of sportswear designs that were screen printed with designs, and I was going more South American indigenous patterns, but I was always fascinated by indigenous art. And then I realized when I first came to Toronto, it was through a competition that I won that never happened again, and I'm hoping that one day we can do that again. But it was a national Aboriginal fashion design competition.
That would be neat to do that again.
Yes, it should happen, because it was the catalyst that changed my life, actually.
I imagine it must have changed others' lives, even if they didn't win. It's still a huge opportunity to move through.
And it was through, interestingly enough, the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. Mm-hmm. And so I was one.
We just had JP on the show.
I know.
He said hello.
I know. So, 25 years ago, that's what brought me clear across the country. And they offered a 6-month internship program. And so there was myself and I think 3 other Indigenous designers from all across.
Where were you interning, or where were you to intern?
I chose not to go with a designer, actually.
Oh.
And I chose to go with a woman who was starting up at that time a designer division of the Canadian Apparel Federation.
Okay.
So my first job, as soon as I, showed up for my first day, they all kind of had to leave and go do some kind of demonstration somewhere. And I said, okay, well, go in there. Your job is to get together 12 of the best Canadian designers we have in the country, and we're going to have them show at the first ever NAFTA exhibit trade show in Mexico City. I'm like, okay, I've never done that before, but all right.
I'm up for it. I'll try anything.
Throw you in. And yeah, so that's what I did. It was amazing. So I had to learn how to deal with ministers from Ottawa. It was a whole big government thing. I went to Mexico City. It was terrifying at first because I'm talking to designers who I'm just like, oh my God, hey Clark, people like that.
Why did you choose not to go with a designer? By that age, you were already interested in design. You had already done your own designs. Yeah. And yet, instead of going to shadow a successful designer who you might one day want to evolve towards being, you chose to work with an organization. And that organization has, in turn, lots of contacts in the network. So I might think that that's a great way to get networked early, but what was your thinking in deciding to go that route?
I think because it gave me, so I come from Vancouver where there's no real major fashion industry still. And so out east, this is where everything was happening, right? So not only did I get to learn how to network and meet all of the fashion media in the country, but this woman also was a part of what is now Toronto Fashion Week, or was Toronto Fashion Week. So back then it was called the Toronto Ready-to-Wear Collections. So I was able to learn how to produce what goes into producing an International Fashion Week, and all of that went with it. So to me, I wanted to learn every aspect of the industry. And I was doing that before, so I've done makeup, I've done hair, I've produced my own fashion shows. I know how to liaise with government, I know how to deal with media. I wanted to be as well-rounded in the industry as I possibly could, and that has really served me well.
I would imagine, because you are later going to have to work with these people in different roles. When did you leave that role, and what came next?
Well, as the designers division was put in place because at that time, Canadian apparel manufacturers were mostly, it was a very male-dominated industry for one, and they didn't feel that there was a need for designers. So Carol O'Trim...
Things magically design themselves?
Well, actually, Canada was we had a reputation that was almost similar to China, basically. So if you were a Canadian apparel manufacturer and you wanted to go to a textile show or some kind of apparel show in Europe somewhere, they wouldn't let you in because they would be afraid that you would copy everything. And that was
the reputation.
Yeah, so it was about apparel manufacturers, not designers.
Understood.
So there's a huge distinction, right?
Okay. So when did you leave that role and what came next?
So there were two indigenous designers who were just starting up at that time, who were our organization was helping to promote nationally and internationally. That would have been Darcy Moses and Dorothy Grant.
Okay.
And working with them and seeing what they were doing really inspired me. And I realized there's a huge opportunity to not only do something really radically different, but to showcase, my culture from my people in a way that maybe people haven't seen before. And then I felt there was a real need to do that.
So what's your first step once you determine that real need?
Well then, because I'm an idealist, and my future husband at the time was a well-known Mohawk artist from Six Nations, and we decided to move back to that community and set up a factory so that I could provide jobs and training and have an actual industry happening there.
So that's when you started your own brand?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about the early days of developing a brand, especially a brand that's entering the fashion world. What was that experience like?
It's a lot of work.
Tell me about that.
So not only do you have to do a lot of promotion and marketing, and at that time, so I am selling to a larger market.
Okay.
So at that time, it's about having samples that you're selling to sales agents, so across Canada, and then I was doing apparel markets in Dallas, Texas, and Denver, and Chicago, and those things. So there were more, it wasn't the line that I'm doing now that's much more high-end and very exclusive.
This indigenous luxury line that we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yeah, that's
so your
not
first
this.
brand was more.
It was more
wide.
sort of casual wear that had embroidered things, but still beautiful fabrics and velours and things like that. There were
Was it successful?
Yeah, it was.
So what does it mean to be a manufacturer, one shop, one designer, and be successful? Does that mean everything sells out? Does that mean you're making billions of dollars? Does that mean you're employing people? What is your life like now that people are buying what you're not only designing but also producing?
Well, it just means that there's not a lot of time to sleep.
What's that like?
So it's lots of travel. It's hard. Yeah, because I knew, as far as my industry experience, this is how we're taught to do things, and you're selling to other, retailers across North America, and so it's a lot of juggling. There's a lot of money that you have to put out before it comes back. You have sales agents that you have to pay. Major deadlines, things like that, and so it was going really well. And in order to have, my own sewing staff or whatever, we had to do a sewing training program.
Okay.
So that meant that I ended up having to become a school at the same time. So Mohawk College in Hamilton at that time did have a fashion design program, so we partnered with them to do. I think there were 6 to 8 week industrial sewing training programs.
And you're doing this, you're training your future employees because you can't find them locally, or you can't find persons in the community that you want to use?
Well, I wanted to have people that was the whole point, of setting up the factory there, is that we'd
So even if you had to train them from nothing, it was a worthwhile thing because the greater goal was this self-sufficiency, this people employment, not handouts.
Yes. And then, some things that you don't foresee happening. So I hired someone from Brantford who had had his own factory and many, many years of experience to do the training because I couldn't do it all myself. We had waiting lists for this program. It was very successful. And the hope was that I was going to have people that, I was going to cherry pick the best to stay with me so that we could grow and whatever. Fortunately, he had a lot of buddies in the industry and lots of factories outside of where we were located that he cherry-picked the best and got them jobs in other factories. So there was,
That's a little unfortunate. So how do you recover from that? Do you fire him and start doing the training yourself? Do you somehow change the relationship with Mohawk College?
Well, so we did it, I think, for about a year.
Okay.
And then it just got to the point where it wasn't working for me. So we just, and there were other factors, even with our building. So we had to move from our location, and there's a huge housing at that time building crisis, basically in the community. So we really had nowhere to move to. So it was one of those things. It's like, okay, well, we did this. This was great.
So did you have to walk away from the whole project? Did you have to go overseas or just start something new?
No, we just started something new.
So let's not brush over that. So you did this for a number of years.
Yeah.
You put your heart and your soul into it. You were happy. You provided education and training. You empowered people to get jobs. But you also then had to walk away from it. Do you remember what that felt like?
Oh, it was devastating.
How so?
Well, when you've put so much of your effort and money into something and then, circumstances happen and that you can't control, once again, you have to change direction. And interestingly enough, when I look back on it, everything happens for a reason. And not long after, so we had to, we went from a 6,000 square foot facility to a 700 square foot facility and became retail, and then I just operated from there. But shortly after that, 9/11 happened. And then that was the end of my wholesale business to the U.S. for a while.
Cross-border just became undoable.
Impossible.
So let's change to a happier topic. Tell me about opening your first boutique. What was that process like?
Well, the one in Hamilton is actually not the first one, but it's the first major one in a central city. Okay. So that was really amazing.
Tell me, what made it so amazing?
So it's on a street that, the entire sort of downtown of the city is undergoing a complete restructuring from being a steel city to one that's actually about creative arts, IT, McMaster University.
How did you come to decide to do it in Hamilton? Because there's any number of places you could have put the boutique. Yorkville in Toronto, Montreal is old Montreal. Why did you choose Hamilton?
Well, for a number of reasons. So one of the things that I've also had to accommodate in my entrepreneurial life for the last 15 years is being a single parent. So I had to be close to where my kids were, and Hamilton was, quite close. It was also just starting a whole change, and the street that I chose is one that's renowned for art. And so they have an art crawl every month, and there was no indigenous art in the city at all. So it's kind of like finding where I fit, something that was affordable. I got to know a lot of the business owners on that street who were so welcoming, and we would so love to have you here. And it was just an easier way for me to start, and I didn't want to have to commute to Toronto. Like, that just would have been have such a negative impact, I think, on my life and my kids' lives. So yeah, it was just like, Hamilton is a wonderful city in that it has a very small town community feel to it, and yet it's a larger city.
I want to talk about something you raised about being a single mom. So some people think entrepreneurship is fabulous for moms and for single moms because there's so much freedom and flexibility, and you make your own schedule. I'm not a single mom, but I have 2 young kids, and I find them incredibly time-consuming and a lovely thing to spend your time on. But running a business at the same time is like having a baby of your own.
Yeah.
So, as a single mom, how do you balance the baby that is the business that puts the food on the table for the kids? There's not like they're so separate, and the kids who need their mother present. They need their mother to be mindful when they're spending time with them, and yet you've got a million things going on. What was that like? What is it like?
It's kind of stressful.
So how do you manage it?
I think I'm just blessed with having a lot of energy always, and for many years after we actually eventually closed the business on Six Nations, and I worked from home. So it changed. I had to change how I did my business. So I was no longer doing wholesaling in the States, but I focused on doing custom, and then I started working more with performers and actors and people in the entertainment industry, which was really wonderful. And that's what I actually loved doing, is more the one-on-one with the people who are actually wearing the things I designed for them, as opposed to a buyer from a store who doesn't necessarily care about all of the
details.
The details that I put into things. So I was able to juggle that actually quite well. And so it's only since my kids are older now that I thought, okay, so it's time for me to be more visible and to have a storefront and have a place where I can promote other Indigenous artists and designers' work as well. So it's been, it's tough to find balance. And in between there, somehow I was even teaching Zumba part-time. So that was my stress releaser.
I remember Bruce Croxton, who's a member of Dragons Den, a billionaire entrepreneur, so forth and so on. He said the only work-life balance for entrepreneurs is you work your ass off for 5 years so that you can take the next 5 years off to spend the money from the first. I don't know how tenable that is. I don't know how that can be a life choice. How do you see work-life balance?
Okay, so for one thing, I love what I do. So it doesn't
seem like work?
No, not really. And it's afforded me, yes, I'm working all the time, but I am that kind of a person. I get bored really easy, which is probably why I've chosen fashion as, my sort of career of choice. And it's different every day, and it's challenging, and you have to think on your feet, and it makes you learn who you really are and what you're capable of, which
can be very empowering.
Oh, absolutely. And I've got to travel, I've met so many amazing people. It's been really a wonderful experience. So, I don't ever really consider retiring, because I don't even understand that word. If you're
what am I going to do with myself?
I know, if you're a creative person, you're always creating. It doesn't matter what that is.
What do you think it takes to be successful in fashion?
In this country?
Sure.
I would say that I would preface being successful in the Canadian fashion industry takes a very long time. It's not a supported industry like it is in the US or other countries. Okay. So, which is unfortunate, and I'm hoping that will start to change really soon.
But if you had to say your success is the result of my X, my Y, and my Z?
Tenacity.
Tenacity.
Passion for what I do. And an absolute belief in what I'm doing. Absolutely belief in what I'm doing. And giving back and empowering, and I'm doing this for others as much as I am for myself. So, and I think that's what really drives me when I start to slowly see changes, and that there is an actual indigenous fashion industry starting to happen. And it's been 20 plus years of promoting that and pioneering it, and then also being able to be flexible and go with the flow and change direction when needed, because that's the way life is.
There's constantly be iterating and pivoting and learning what comes next.
Yeah, because you don't always know.
Are there unique barriers that face Indigenous entrepreneurs?
Oh, many.
Could you share them with me?
Sure. It's you're fighting stereotypes, first thing. If you happen to be in a more remote location or community, you've got challenges there. Not having access to the actual industry, maybe not having access to the proper education or knowing what the mainstream industry, how it actually works, access to materials. I even have that challenge just being, near Toronto. Canada, like the industry has really taken a hit. So it's all starting to come back, thankfully. And then, I think the stereotypes are the most difficult. Lack of education, lack of understanding what Indigenous fashion is or might be. So something really interesting that I just found out the other day. So I'm preparing to go to London Fashion Week in a few weeks. And I get really interesting opportunities all the time. And there's a group in Montreal who are producers of a couple of really amazing award-winning documentaries, and they're about to launch another one, start filming another one, which is about the world's fascination with Native American culture. And they wanted to include me as from the fashion point of view and filming, doing some international runway shows and things. And one of the producers who I've known for a number of years, her daughter happens to be in England right now, going to Central St. Martin's, studying textile design.
Okay.
And so we were hoping that I could somehow meet her, and I'm trying to put together some kind of a panel and talk show over there when I'm there, and to maybe see if one of her professors would be interested in being on the panel. So her mother sent me an email the other day saying, my daughter just finished a paper. It was about luxury fashion. And she chose to do it on Indigenous luxury fashion.
Okay, so I have to be honest. As you can tell, I'm not a fashionista, but I've never heard of an Indigenous luxury. Can you speak to that? What your brand is Indigenous luxury? What does that mean?
Well, that means luxury from a real perspective.
Okay.
Luxury in actually the materials, how things are made. I use the best leathers from Europe, Canadian fur, the actual design process, the intention that goes into it, the culture that goes into it, everything. A lot of hand embroidery, hand beadwork, things like that. And so that is a new terminology for sure, but if you actually look back at Indigenous clothing in the past, even items that are in museums, they are beautifully made items, and the dyes that were used, and the hides, and the handwork, just lasted hundreds of years.
Because they're made so well.
Yes, and the culture and the personal work that goes into that and what they convey. That is my idea of real luxury, things that will last years and generations.
It's almost the opposite of what I heard some fashion students call a new trend, fast fashion.
Yes.
Somebody wears it on stage, so we're all going to shuffle it out the next 90 days. We're going to sell it at a minimum cost, and if it lasts a year, you throw it in the garbage after.
Yes.
That seems like the exact opposite
It is.
of what you're doing. And I want to go one step further. My understanding of how Indigenous culture can impact entrepreneurship, one of them is about sustainability, about not throwing things away, about making the most of things, about making things so that your children have them still available when they come around. And I look at fast fashion, and I look at it as the opposite. It's what can I do for $1 that the kids will like and then won't even care about, and then we'll end up with a big landfill of all of these things. Am I seeing that right?
No, you're absolutely right.
Is that a true Indigenous perspective that in the business world comes out like that? And that's why the luxury brands, that's even why the things in the museums last for hundreds of years, because when you make something personal, you put it together. So what do you think about that? I mean, I may have a wrong analogy.
No, that's absolutely, and that's what I'm doing is re-educating people about how you think about what you buy, because fast fashion is literally destroying the planet.
Absolutely.
So people have to change how they purchase things and think about it. And where is this going to go? Is this going to last me like the first wash, let alone the next season? And that's all about money, and that has actually sort of had a huge impact as far as cultural appropriation goes for us. So if you're like churning out collection after, like 6 collections a year, you're going to run out of ideas. So, then they start looking at cultural things and what's, and then, indigenous culture becomes a fad or a trend
Well, tell me about that, because can you speak to the cultural appropriation and the challenge it creates for indigenous artists? Because that, I can never tell, is that a compliment or an insult? Are the only people who can bring those styles those people? Or how do you look at what's going on in the cultural appropriation space?
It's called exploitation.
Okay.
So there is no recognition or respect for our culture when they take those items, because let's face it, it's become a cut and paste society.
Mm-hmm.
So even, in some fashion programs, around the world or whatever, it's really, inspiration has been used as, we're going to copy it because things happen so fast. It's like not about taking the time to actually use it as inspiration so that you can come up with your own authentic version of that or whatever. And so that takes from one of the most troubled and unsupported group of people in North America. So other people are making billions of dollars on our cultural designs and things, and none of it's going back to the community. So it's a huge problem. We're missing out on that market.
So what's the difference in your mind between inspired by and culturally appropriated? Is it the recognition? Is it the funding? Is it the who's the designer is? So you shouldn't take inspiration from people who you don't belong to that community? Where's the line?
Okay, so how I explain cultural appropriation to people is that if you are buying something, say that it's obviously indigenous,
okay,
and it's coming from a place like H&M or Forever 21 or Urban Outfitters, they are not the originated, that's not authentic.
Okay.
If you're buying something that is from an actual indigenous designer, artist, or whatever, you are supporting that artist and their own culture, and that is what we want you to do.
Okay.
The issue there is that it's been in the past very difficult for people to access authentic indigenous product designs, fashion, art, whatever. It's a little easier in the States because they have things like the Santa Fe Indian Market, which is a world-renowned market every year. We don't have that, an equivalent to that in Canada.
But one of the reasons why that was difficult was the remoteness of some of these communities.
Yeah.
But if we've learned anything in the last 20 years with the internet, is there's a community for people who collect lawn gnomes. Right? So distance is no longer an issue. When I was growing up, if I wanted a Star Trek t-shirt, I had to wait to the convention because there wasn't enough Star Trek people in one place. But now they are. They're all online. You can just go and get a t-shirt. What has the internet done for indigenous fashion from a way of distribution? Because it would seem that would deal with the remote issue.
Yes, for sure. I would say Instagram has been like a huge boost to indigenous artists and artisans and designers. It's made a whole lot of things possible that weren't before.
Like what? Like, give me that concrete example of what is different creating a new design in 1990 than in 2020 because of the internet, because of social media.
Well, you get because it's all visual, it's very much enabling you to get in front of the world. So like this beautiful beaded item that I'm wearing.
Okay, let's get a close-up of a beautiful beaded item. Yeah, okay, you just keep going. Yeah.
So this was created specifically for me for my recent Of the Stars collection by a very talented Métis artist in Calgary, and her company name is called Savage Rose. That's what she goes by.
Okay.
So she sells everything online through Instagram. And she, a lot of them now do auctions. There's a whole renaissance of these super talented indigenous artists and designers who are changing, they're using traditional techniques such as hand beadwork like this, but doing it in a really cool, fashion-forward way, and they're making huge names for themselves. It's amazing. So it's allowed a lot of people and designers and, even, fashion, everything.
I was surprised to learn that your expansion is focusing on international. In particular, Peru is your expansion target. And I just thought to myself, but there's so much more to do in Canada. There's so much more to do in North America. Did you make a conscious decision that you wanted to expand outside of the country as opposed to doing more presence in Canada?
Yes, and
Can I ask why?
Okay, so when I first started, most of my business was actually in the U.S.
Okay.
So it was a different market than Canada. Canada is not necessarily a designer fashion market. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I have been vocal about, is that we have all of these major luxury department stores and Saks, Fifth Avenue, and Nordstrom's, and Lord & Taylor. And there are maybe a couple of Canadian brands sold in there. You can't find Canadian fashion available.
Why? Is that a consumer not demanding it, or is that a manufacturer not pushing it because they can get cheaper stuff abroad? Why do you think that is? And more importantly, what would you like to change?
Well, I would like to see Canadian designers being sold in those stores.
So how do we come about making that happen?
Sort of, I guess, stating a case to these the buyers of these stores to sort of reach out, but we have to sort of be in front of them. There's a lack of visibility. Canadians have definitely become very used to buying cheap, fast fashion.
Throwaway clothes, yeah.
And so, it's now an education process, teaching them, okay, it's better to have, fewer items that are better made, that are really amazing and beautiful, that you love, as opposed to a huge closet full of junk that you're going to end up throwing away.
But isn't that a cultural, consumer-driven change? Or are you suggesting that people are doing that because that's what's being produced?
Well,
if we all decided we only would wear indigenously produced clothing, the market would change. The demand would cause stores to react in a certain way. But which caused it to go into this way? When did we get away from quality and longevity and durability and get into quantity?
NAFTA, that would be government policy, opening the doors to India, things like that. And so a lot of the large factories closed up and moved offshore. So and then that has had an impact on factories here. So there are so few factories now, and ones that, and skilled labor is kind of a crisis situation. So we have to because more and more people realize we want made in Canada. So there also has to be a campaign for Made in Canada to support that and to get that information out to the public, so they realize, we're.
It is a choice.
It's a sustainable industry. We had one for, a long, long time, and be proud of buying Canadian. Support jobs. Support the fashion students who are graduating from these amazing programs.
Okay. Let's talk directly to the people in the audience who would like to follow in your footsteps, would like to be self-employed, would like to work in the fashion industry, would like to be entrepreneurial. What lessons and mistakes have you made and obtained that can help them get there faster, better?
Well, I'm sure I've made lots of mistakes.
Let's talk about them.
How can you not?
Let's talk about them.
It's really just, you have to have a mentality of being an entrepreneur. You have to sort of be comfortable with taking risks. And sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's good to have partners, sometimes it's not a good thing. I can't really sort of speak to actual physical mistakes that I made, other than, maybe timing things. Nobody has a magic ball to know exactly how things are going to go. But you do have to understand what's happening in the marketplace and what's happening in the world in regards to the industry. You can't just focus on what's happening in Canada per se. because we are affected by the rest of the world. So I think sometimes, I went from being sort of a really major international designer when I first started and was forced to bring it all back. And so I've had to make those changes, in regards to my family and other things that I could manage. But then you also have to think bigger. It all depends on what it is that you want to do.
Okay.
You can, be a small entity, and if you're happy with that, then that's great. But if you want to be larger, then you have to, you have to bring people on board who have that experience and know the market. I've never actually really had the opportunity to have a mentor all of these years because people didn't really understand what I was doing. I remember years ago, I don't think they have them anymore, but the Canadian government had these programs. They were Nexus programs, kind of like NEBs, new exporters to border states. And so one time we went to New York City and met with, people in the industry, sales agents or whatever. And I had this, and this was sort of at the beginning of my career or my business, and this long-time white male who had been in the business for, 30 years or something, said to me then, there is no market for cultural fashion. And if I had listened to that man, I would not be here right now.
So what is that? What can our viewers take away? Because they're always told you should solicit information, you should listen to feedback, but some of the feedback is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
How can they tell the difference?
You just have to have a gut feeling and a belief in what you're doing. And you have to be savvy enough to know what's happening in the market. And I'm one of those people where I see gaps. And where there's a gap, there's an opportunity. So that's how I look at things. It's like, I've never gone with the flow. I've never done what other people are doing, which makes things a little harder for sure.
For sure.
And it takes a lot longer for people to sort of get on board with that. But ultimately, you're doing your own thing and you're making change, positive change.
That can't be easy.
No.
Well, what was easy is having a conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming in. You've been watching The Naked Entrepreneur. I'm Dr. Sean Wise. We'll see you next time.